Marc Rotella is the editor of Publishers Weekly. He is a third-generation Italian-American whose works have appeared on the New York Times and other prestigious publications. A few months ago, the North Point Press publishers published his travel memoir, Stolen Figs and the Other Adventures in Calabria. Stolen Figs is the subject of our conversation today. Welcome,
Hello.
Mr. Rotella.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure for me to have you here. Anyway, you live in New Jersey. You had to go come all the way from New Jersey, right?
Yes, 2 rivers from Jersey City, 2 rivers through Manhattan, and then out to Great Neck, and this is my first time out
where
here.
Specifically do you live in New Jersey?
I live in Jersey City, just in view of Manhattan.
Ah, you were born over there?
I was actually born in Connecticut, which is where my father and my mother met. In Danbury, Connecticut. When I was about 1 or 2 years old, we moved down to Atlanta, Georgia, and then after that down to Florida, which is where I grew up.
Wow.
And it wasn't until I came up to New York for college that I ended up here for thinking I was going to be here for 4 years, but I've been here about 17 or 18 now.
Oh, so you had your high schools in Florida, I imagine? Or
Yes,
and
yeah.
college here?
Yes, in St. Petersburg, Florida.
I think I've been there only once. So what did you major in college? What was your...
Well, my father had wanted me to major in something that, some sort of vocation. And he always said that languages were the best thing to learn. And I ended up studying Russian literature. And I became fluent in Russian, and moved to, well, not moved, but I traveled Russia for a little while. So it was Russian literature, something I'm not doing anything with right now.
But apparently it influenced you to write then.
Yes, this is true. I was greatly influenced by some of the Russian writers, mostly Chekhov in his simplicity of narration. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But anyway, when did you know or you felt that you wanted to write? Was it early age or?
Probably began in college or right beginning of college, and I started off writing poetry and then short stories, and I had always fancied myself a writer. I'd always, even after I'd graduated from college, I had been writing, and it wasn't until well after I graduated from college that I got my first book published, this one.
Now you are the editor of Publishers Weekly. What is precisely that magazine or that weekly publication?
Publishers Weekly is the trade magazine of the book publishing world. We have a sister magazine called Library Journal, but Publishers Weekly is the it's read by book publishers, by agents, by movie directors, and by other writers.
Was it any easier for you to get published because of? Do you think you got some sort of advantage, or?
That's a good, that's a good question. It seems like I would. I think perhaps, if nothing else, people would at least read my manuscript. That didn't mean that they would necessarily buy the manuscript. And I think with any publishing house, they're going to want to make money. They're going to want to make money. They're not going to want to take a chance on it.
And tell me, you also published with the New York Times. Were you a reporter or?
No, I've just done a couple of freelance, a few freelance writing gigs with them. I've written on traveling to Calabria, and I've also written about actually the last of the red sauce restaurants in New York City, about the tradition of the red sauce, the old style Italian-American restaurant, and how that is and how this kind of formed what we know of New York now.
You're a third-generation Italian-American, right?
Right.
Your father was born here, and your mother also?
Yes. Well, actually, my father was born in Danbury a year after my grandmother came from Calabria. And my mother is actually French-Canadian, born in Montreal, though grew up in Danbury. So I'm actually only half Italian.
I see. But anyway, at any rate, you discovered that there was another place besides Danbury, Italy.
Yes, exactly.
How did you discover that? Was it your father who
I had
told you
always heard.
stories,
I
or?
had always heard of my father had always told me that his parents were poor farmers in Calabria in Italy, and it wasn't until I was in high school, and this is growing up in a very mostly Protestant, very little Catholic area. With I was one of the few Italians who I knew in St. Petersburg, and this is my first year in Catholic school. And a fellow student asked me, he said, "Oh, Rotella, that's Italian, isn't it?" I said, "Well, yeah." And he said, "Well, what part of Italy are you from?" And I said, "Well, actually, I don't know. What about you?" And he said, "Sicily." And I said, "Oh, okay." And I went back to ask my father, and I said, "Dad, are we Sicilian?" He goes, "No, we're Calabrese. We're the toe of the boot, just above Sicily."
I see. Okay, so you found out, but in school, did you learn anything about Italy or about?
Oh, sure.
Yes.
We had, I had always spoken with my grandmother in dialect. So Italian was, while not spoken at home, it was spoken whenever we spent time with my grandparents. So it was a mixture of dialect, Calabrese dialect, and English. So, and then in college, I also did take formal Italian classes
did?
as well. Yes.
So there came a point you understood a little Italian.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
You did not
yeah.
take any Italian literature, for example. Did they offer it to your school?
They did, yes.
Oh,
I
that's
graduated from Columbia, and there's the I don't know if it's the Casa Italiana there, but they did offer
Casa
Italian
Italiana.
course, but I never took anything but the language courses.
Oh, so you went to Columbia University.
Right.
Oh, so
Right.
you know the Casa Italiana.
Yes,
Oh,
exactly. Yeah.
okay. Tell me, and then it came a time you felt that maybe you wanted to write a book about Calabria?
It was interesting. I had been traveling to Calabria the first time I took my father there, and I came back and I was talking to one of my friends who happens to be a literary agent, just telling her my stories. And she said, "Mark, this sounds like a great idea for a travel memoir. Why don't you maybe write a proposal and see if we can sell it?" So I did, wrote a proposal and wrote a couple of sample chapters, and it took a little while to do that, but that's what we, North Point Press, ended up buying the book on.
I see. And so, briefly, what is this story about, the stolen figs?
The story is about the rediscovery of my family. Actually, from my father, the rediscovery of his family, the discovery of my family. And from there, it became a search for this, about the, a discovery of this region, Calabria, which very few Americans, even Americans, know about. Mostly people hear of Sicilians or the Napolitan, but about a third of all Americans of Italian descent, roughly about a third, have come from Calabria. And it's a little known place, and I wanted to open it up to.
So, in a way, you start a travelogue, or you start traveling to Calabria, and you travel throughout the Calabria.
Yes.
The
Oh,
region.
yes.
Now,
Yeah.
Calabria is a region of Italy, and it's the
Right.
last one of the continent,
Before
right?
Sicily.
Before Sicily comes.
Yes.
Well, you just mentioned that a third of Calabrians come to America.
Well, actually, a third of Americans, roughly a third of Americans of Italian descent, can trace their lineage to Calabria.
So it's a large, supposedly a large amount of
It is.
people migrated.
It is. I should say it's one of the, I think, following Sicily and Naples,
Probably is the
it's
third.
probably.
Do you any Italian Americans that are of Calabrian background? Can you tell me so that who are these people? Where
Sure,
are they?
sure.
Any American of notable American of Calabrian background?
Well, I think the most notable for me was Gaetalese, who
That's
wrote
one
the
of
book
the
Unto the Sons.
most important Italian American
I
writers.
think so. I think so. I think
He
Barbara
comes
Grissetti-
from Calabria.
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
Well, his father came from Calabria.
You visited his town.
I
family.
did.
All right.
I did. Maida.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
So, and who else comes from Calabria?
Another writer is part Calabrese, is Barbara Grissetti Harrison.
Uh-huh.
And let's see, I'm trying to think of as far as more recent people.
Okay.
There's Steven Tyler, the lead singer of Aerosmith, is also Calabrese.
Really?
Yes.
How about Versace? Versace?
Yes, Versace, the designer, is Calabrese, from right around Reggio di Calabria.
Uh-huh. Okay, and what about paparazzi? That was a surprise to me. Paparazzi is a word that is used every day today in the entertainment world. What is it? Has any connection with Calabria too?
Yes, there was a writer, George Gissing, who had traveled through, as a Scottish writer, who traveled throughout Calabria, and he came across in Catanzaro this, it was a restaurant owner who also owned the hotel. He owned the hotel, who also owned the restaurant. And he insisted that Gissing not only stay at his hotel, but eat at in his restaurant, because he didn't want people to think that they didn't like that, someone didn't like his food. And this person became known as a paparazzi, someone who's always buzzing about. And it was Fellini who picked up this term after having read this book, and used it in his films.
Pejorative.
And then
yeah.
it became a pejorative term for paparazzi.
Now, let's see. Calabria is, talk about the geography, is at the bottom of Italy. Historically, does it have any meaning? Does it have any events that are of historic importance? For example,
Right.
I don't know, the myths and things like that.
Yes, well, Calabria is surrounded by water on 3 sides and mountains on 1. It's very difficult to get to, I think, historically. There were, many knows, I guess, Virgil landed in Squillace there, according to Aeneas, and as well, Homer.
Aeneas.
Yes, I'm sorry, Aeneas.
Virgil.
Yes, I'm sorry, exactly.
According to
Aeneas
Virgil.
landed there, according to
So he's
Virgil.
landed there.
Yeah.
Aeneas was now somebody.
Yes, yeah, and well,
Who
and
was
then,
he? Who was he?
he was Ulysses. Well, I'm sorry.
No, Aeneas was the one who was sent by the gods to create another culture,
exactly,
which became Rome.
which became right,
Right.
exactly,
So it's
right.
good to.
Yes.
So Aeneas, he landed there and eventually went north and to his relations or his family eventually built Rome.
Right.
Okay, but before is there any evidence that before, let's say, the Greeks, even the Greeks arrived to Calabria, is there evidence that there were people there?
Yes, actually, Pythagoras settled there. He was excommunicated from Greece. Actually, he had to flee Greece, and he set up his colony there, or at least his group of observers there in Calabria.
Pythagoras is a very big Greek philosopher and mathematician.
Yes.
Pythagoras, we all had to learn
The Pythagorean theorem.
At high school. But before them, you talk about the Riace statues that are pre-Greek.
Right. Yes, they were. These are pre-Greek statues that were bronze statues that were found just off the coast of Calabria. They're so old. Much of Italy, Sicily, and Rome wanted to carry them in their museum, but Calabria thought, say no. It was off our coast.
So there is already population in that area before the Greeks arrived. In fact,
yes.
when Ulysses, according to Homer, when
right.
Ulysses passed by Calabria,
right.
he stopped a few places there, right?
Yes.
And he found people. In fact, in the Odyssey, you can read that there are people already in Sicily, or not Sicily, well, also in Sicily.
Right.
Sicily and Calabria.
Yes, this is actually where he came across Nausicaa, who he would marry briefly before Nausicaa's father would send him back on his way to
He lands
Greece.
on the beach.
He lands on the beach and sees
Probably
a beautiful woman.
Our audience must have seen the movie by, what's his name? Anyway, there was a movie, right, where the ship drowned, whatever,
yes,
everybody drowns, he saves himself, and this beautiful girl
appears to him,
revives him, and then he eventually marries. And that's in Calabria.
And that's in Calabria, yes.
I see. And after the Greeks, other people came in, right? Or even before that, who are the first people that inhabited Calabria? The Bruttians?
The Bruttians were before the Greeks. The Bruttians are the indigenous people of Calabria and Basilicata, just north. These are the indigenous people there. And then after the Greeks, the Romans came. They were chasing Alaric the Goth down there, and it is actually where Alaric died in Cosenza. And so it's a region that had been really always controlled by, with the exception of the Greeks, controlled by others up until the unification of Italy in the
Which is
1860s.
1860. Now the word Calabria itself, maybe you can explain to us a little, what does it mean, Calabria?
There are a few definitions, a few ideas out there. The one that I found talked about most comes from the Greek kalos bruos, which means fertile earth. And from there, and also this was a name that was originally attributed to the heel, and all of the from the heel, and then later came down to the toe of the boot.
The idea we have today of Calabria is a semi-desert. Is that would be still valid to say the?
Yes, it's very rocky. Prickly pear grows on the mountain sides. It's very dry, desiccated in the summer. There is one area, the Sila Forest, which is in the northern mountains, which is the largest forest in all of Italy right now, and that's really dense.
And that's a
evergreen
protected
tears.
area.
It is exactly in the Sila Massif.
Well, we had another writer here from Calabria, Peter Chiarella.
Yes.
And he spoke about the weather in Calabria, which becomes like a character of the wind.
The
hot
Scirocco
wind
winds
comes
come in,
from.
yes, from Africa.
Okay. The book itself for now, Stolen Figs.
Yes.
And so this is a travel memoir.
Yes.
How long did you stay in Calabria before you could write this?
Mm-hmm. I had been traveling there every other year, sometimes twice a year for about 10 years. I did spend about a month there one time, 2 months in 1 year, spending time just traveling around with a gentleman named Giuseppe Chiarella, who's a photographer who actually was the one who reintroduced me to my family and my father to my family, and he offered to take me around Calabria.
So he's not a fictitious character. He's a real person.
He's a real character.
In fact, when I read him, it reminded me of Peter Chiarella. I thought maybe there would be some relationship.
It could very well be.
And tell me, Stolen Figs. What is it? Why is it Stolen Figs? Is this a crime story? Or?
There's two ideas. I think figs grow everywhere in Calabria. And one need only to, if there's an overhanging branch over a sidewalk, one need only to pick it, and they've kind of stolen a fig. It's also, I think Calabria grows so many figs and exports them, but it doesn't really see much in return monetarily for its exports. And this also leads to a story in the book about traveling around with Giuseppe and traveling around. And we ended up stealing a fig.
The fig, basically, it's not in the American diet, or maybe many people don't even know what fig is. Yet it is in literature. For example, D.H. Lawrence writes about the fig, associates the figs to the female sexual organ, and he shows the girl how to eat a fig.
Right.
So that's quite a. Also, the fig is associated with the Italians. I think Italians who left Italy, especially from the south, brings with them or brought with them figs.
A fig tree. Yes.
So it's a fruit that perhaps is mostly associated with the Italians.
Yes, I think so. I think so. And I think I've been seeing now more when I go to restaurants or in cookbooks or even in the pages of the New York Times, figs is starting to make themselves known to more and more people.
Now that you talk about figs, in your book, many times you go in detail what you eat. Is this an obsession of yours in telling us what you ate, or is it just an affinity to do with, related to Calabria itself as a recipes, as a food, a specialty?
I cook a lot. I think I'm the cook in the family, but so much of food brings back memories for me, I think for my father. I think once we taste something, just like, as they say, Proust Madeleine, it just brings back a rush of memories. Some things that I've never been able to reproduce that my grandmother had cooked, in ways that my grandmother had cooked, in ways that I was never able to, I never knew how to. And it wasn't until I got to Calabria that I felt, oh my gosh, this is what I've been eating. This is what I remember from when I was a little kid. And so this is why I write about it. Just it seemed like, and it seemed for them it was such a natural occurrence to have 3 great meals a day.
In addition to the food, what determines your Italian American aspect or identity? Is there anything else besides the food?
That I guess that defines me as an Italian or an Italian American.
Italian or Italian American. I guess there is a distinction between.
Right. Yeah, it's true.
Your father also tried to stay away a little from Italy, and then towards the end of the book, you realize that in fact probably that is what you discover. There is a difference of identity, even though
Right.
you are in Calabria, you still have to come back. You get homesick, and so there is.
Right.
But of course, Italian American means much more than just food.
It does. I think. Well, I think it's maybe how we approach others, how we deal with others. Um, uh, it's hard to sum up. I mean, I've written so much about it in here. There's different instances where I feel while I was in Italy more American than Italian, as much as I had wanted to be Italian. I think culturally, well, yes, I think there's definitely more to it than the food.
Yeah, definitely. And you also have mentioned in your book the idea, introduced the idea of the organized crime. I felt that you felt that you had to say something about it. In fact, you do.
Right.
Several times. What does the organized crime of what we call here mafia does to the region of Calabria?
I hadn't necessarily wanted to mention it, though when I was in Calabria, I felt that it was quietly all around, the 'Ndrangheta, which is the Calabrese mafia. And I think in ways, as much as the people of Naples, the people of Sicily have been outspoken about theirs, the Calabrese are just now starting to be a little bit outspoken about the mafia there, which still, unlike other organized crime, still has is very strongly a blood lineage. And therefore, the idea of omertà, the silence, is still there. And most Calabrese prefer not to speak about it. If it does exist, it's always the next village over. They'll always go back to their gardens.
One of the things that you brought about, which I think is very important, is that whenever you visited a town that had no organized crime influence, the towns were flourishing. While when you went to a town where they had this kind of plague, the mafia,
Right.
the towns were really abandoned and people did not have character or whatever. They were afraid.
Right.
Did you find that? Was it widespread?
I found, as was pointed out to me, you could go through a town, and exactly that. The towns that were entrenched in the mafia, there was no progress there. They didn't seem very clean. There was graffiti all over the place. And you definitely had a feeling of that there might be a certain element of danger here, not so much to you personally, but to perhaps those living there. That it was definitely these, and it was really kind of spotty where I saw them, that it was the absence of progress.
I see. In the book, you obviously are, or the character invites the father to go back to the old country.
Right.
The father-son relationship that it shows very nicely because what is why you felt that you wanted your father to go back?
I couldn't have imagined. I mean, just from his stories that he told me from growing up, his stories and my grandparents' stories, I felt that I couldn't make a trip without him. There was something there that just, I mean, I could have easily made the trip on my own, at which point I almost did. My father was really reluctant to go back.
But of course, he was not born over there. He was born here.
Exactly. He was born in Danbury, though he had spent time there with his mother.
I see, before that.
Right, exactly. Um, and for him, and he had known a lot. He still had cousins and aunts and uncles
You
there.
start the trip from
From
north
Perugia.
of it, from Perugia.
From Umbria.
What was your father doing there?
He was sculpting. He was sculpting marble in
Oh, he's a
Perugia,
sculptor.
and then going to Pietrasanta, sculpting there as well. And I spent a month with him while he was doing this. And during this month, I had just convinced him to make.
He's
a trip
still a
with me.
sculptor? He's still
He still is. Yes.
Oh.
Yes. Yes.
he's still
yeah.
in Italy, or?
No, no, no. In
He-
Florida,
he's in
actually.
Florida.
In Florida.
Now, you went with your, also at one of those trips, especially when you went with your mother and father, you went also with your wife.
Yes.
Tell us about when you reached the town, it was a holiday, and what kind of holiday was that? Something very typical of Southern Italian especially, or
Right.
the Christian, I guess.
This was actually the Festa di Madonna di Porto, and this is where the Virgin Mary had appeared to a young boy, Pietro Gatto, who and every year there's everyone from the village and from the surrounding villages makes a pilgrimage to Gimigliano, and this village of 3,000 swells to 20, 25, 30,000 people, where they walk from Gimigliano a few miles to the sanctuary of the Madonna di Porto.
And the fact that this procession of the Virgin, the baby,
Right.
the child, and Joseph, it brought some point from you saying the family, the Holy Family, in fact, was an occasion to bring together your own family.
Yes. Oh, yeah, definitely. There was at one point they marched this picture of the Virgin Mary that had been supposedly painted by the hand of God to the church, where a statue of Joseph and Jesus reunite. And to me, this was a reunite.
Well, I think the book has to do with identity, search for the past,
Right.
and I think the reinforcement of the family unity. But I have to tell you, we have reached the end of our program.